Hello, and welcome to today's interview. I have with me Mr. Bob Barker, who is a longtime Star Wars fan, and I know you cosplay. Are you a member of the 501st Legion or
Yes, I am. I've been a member for 17 years with the 501st Legion.
17 years? Okay, so longtime reader, video game player, all things enjoyer of Star Wars. Although one of the things that we'll talk about, of course, is our reactions to some of the recent Star Wars stories that have been released. But let's start at the beginning. Bob, how did you get into Star Wars?
Well, I guess I got into Star Wars like a lot of kids. I went to see it when I was maybe 4 years old. I have memories of my parents taking me to a drive-in theater. It doesn't exist anymore in Fallensby, West Virginia, and that's where I saw it, and that's where the obsession started. And
And
what
was
got
this
me
the original release, or was this the special editions? Or
this was 1977. So
all
yes.
right,
And there wasn't much you could get back then, but I do remember the first things that came out were the novelization, the comic books. The comic books were probably the most prevalent thing that you could find.
really?
Oh yes, oh yes. The first three issues of Marvel comics came out before the movie came out, and
Ah,
that was secured through a deal by the head of Lucasfilm Limited's PR head. His name was Charles Lippincott, who passed away a few years ago. That was part of his multi-pronged plan to make everyone know about this film, and that it was about a year. It was almost a year and a half before the first action figures started coming into the hands of people, because they famously sold the empty box with the promise that once the figures are made, then they'll ship them to you.
that is so interesting because the Marvel comics I feel kind of disappeared for a long time because they weren't available, and of course the digital libraries weren't around in the 90s or most of the early 2000s. And so until they started publishing those omnibuses that Dark Horse and then Marvel did, I feel like a lot of fans who didn't get into it just read the novels, the junior and adult novels. Uh, but then, of course, when the archival editions started coming out, they became this big thing again. It was interesting because I personally don't think they fit that well with what came in the 90s.
No, it was very much a creature of its time,
Yes.
but it does have its charm and it does have its place. Um, the Some of the Marvel storylines were fantastic, some a little less so, but they didn't have a lot to go on. They were riffing off of the sci-fi of the day, which was mostly Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers like, and what they knew of Star Trek, and that was not entirely in line with Lucas's vision, nor the movies that followed afterwards. But the first time that ordinary people could read these comics that were not there to buy them when they came out was in the early 90s. I think Dark Horse started re-releasing everything, and that's when everyone was able to pick up every single issue in a trade paperback, and that's what ignited the passion for them again.
Yeah. And then, of course, they started getting integrated into the novels with, I would argue, mixed success, but certainly popular.
There are certain authors that have greater success stitching all the lore together than others. I think Mr. Salvador is really good at doing that, and I can think of maybe the author of Darth Plagueis that
Yes,
comes to
Mr.
mind.
Lucino is quite
He's
renowned for his encyclopedic knowledge and weaving together of stories.
he's very, very gifted at that, and he makes it make sense. And that's one of the great gifts of of the EU, is that sometimes you see stories that don't make sense, and then someone comes along years later and makes them a little better than what you remember them, by putting them better use. That happens quite a bit.
So, what do you think? Um, is core to why you've been such a dedicated fan and enjoyer of Star Wars stories these 40 years?
Well, I would say initially it was the amazing call to adventure. You never saw anything quite like this. You know, there's a lot of movies and shows that have good special effects, but Star Wars had a story that you could sink your teeth into. It was about family. It was about redemption. It was about great betrayals, great falls, and everything in between, leading back. I mean, like the beauty of it is at the end of Star Wars, the end of this highly special effect laden film. You know, the original Star Wars Episode 4. Luke has, uses the Force to fire his proton torpedo. So he's got all this technology around you, and this film is nothing but a miracle of technology, and it gives you a very anti-technological message on how he saves the day. And then you get to the end of Return of the Jedi, and you have Luke, who's spent 3 films learning how to be a Jedi to stop the Emperor and to stop Darth Vader. And how he defeats the Emperor has nothing to do with being a Jedi at all. He just turns around and says, "No, I'm done. You're not going to manipulate me or my family anymore." And because of that, the Emperor tries to kill him, and Vader turns back to the good side, and he stops the Emperor. He kills him. There's no Force. There's no Jedi. There's no Sith. It's the love of his son that redeems the father. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
Indeed.
I mean, I haven't seen anything like that. And there's been literally hundreds and hundreds of sci-fi films and rip-offs, and some are really good and some are memorable. But nothing's come close to that, and that's why it's still around. But that's what got me into it. What held me? Everything in this room, I can connect to either a family member or someone I know and love that's around the world now. So it's become a vehicle of social connection, unlike anything I've ever had in my life or even know of that's out there. That's the beauty of the fandom. And I don't think the more prominent members of the fandom are even aware of its scale, or at least have not even scratched that surface yet.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is you get an idea of the fandom if you're online, which doesn't reflect all the people whose fandom is offline, is in conventions and meetups and just book clubs and all these things that don't leave a loud social media presence.
It's just influencers, and influencers aren't real life. They aren't. They don't have
They're
any.
not, but they do, as their name suggests, they influence real life, usually for the worse.
They're famous for liking something. Well, I like something, and I know a lot of other people that like something, and they're a heck of a lot more interesting. I know. Okay, there's a guy that got very, very wealthy back in the 70s and 80s during the computer boom. He pretty much sold computers all around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, became a multimillionaire. And some collectors may know him. He's the founder of Rebel Scum, which was a toy catalog website for Star Wars toys. He has a private gathering once a year, private collectors that come in and display things. This is not a convention you can buy a ticket to. It's like being invited to a secret Masonic meeting. If you know someone, they're like, "Hey, would you like to go to this?" And you go there and you see collectibles and props and things that are not on any website. Like it's one of the most fascinating things in the world. I saw a Last Starfighter arcade game that someone not only made from scratch, but they wrote the software to make it look like the game in the movie, which does not exist anywhere. Someone wrote the game. and you see something like that and you walk away, and then you get into arguments with strangers on social media, and you're like, you don't even know what's out there. You don't even have any idea what kind of communities are out there doing and making things. I feel like Gordo Cooper in The Right Stuff, when they ask him who's the best pilot he ever saw. And he wants to say Chuck Yeager, but he can't say it. But yeah, that's the real community. It's out there, and it's amazing. And all you have to do is ask and show your love and show a little bit of humility, and people are glad to bring you in. And they're everywhere. They're all around the world, probably in the places you least suspect.
So how did you get into cosplay in the 501st?
Well, I got my master's degree back in 2005, and for the previous couple years leading up to it, it was just work, sleep, class, and I graduated and I wanted to get a social life back, and I started hearing about different costume conventions, and I'm like, well, I'm a pop culture junkie, and I bought a costume and I started doing that, and I've heard of bigger and bigger costumes, and of course the Super Bowl of costumes is Dragon Con down in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to San Diego Comic-Con a couple times, and that's where it started. I did not want to join the 501st initially. I had a full costume that was approvable, but I didn't. I did have some people kind of lead me into signing up, which I did. I was very grateful for that. And the nature of my job and my life, I traveled a lot, and there were members almost in every town in the country and literally around the world. And so you could easily travel. If you traveled a lot for work, you would just call up some people and say, hey, I heard you have some members here. Is there any chance I can maybe have dinner or go meet them or see them? And that's how you make these incredible friendships. So that's how I got into it. And you only have to troop once a year. I'm not representing the 501st here. I do not speak for them. I'm not an official. But you get an approved costume that fits the criteria of all the costumes that they offer and show. And a lot of people make their own, and sometimes you can buy pieces to put it together, and you troop once a year, and you stay in good standing. A lot of our troops are charity troops. Like you go to a children's hospital, or you do an event with the Special Olympics, or Walks for Autism. There's Special Olympics, Make-A-Wish. There's so many things that you can do, and it's wonderful. It's the kids are amazing. You're combining something that you love. You could be out there raising money for a worthwhile charity, and gives you a good feeling. And your involvement's entirely up to you, depending on where you live. Obviously, more populated areas have more opportunities than most.
And what made you more inclined? I mean, you obviously had your uniform before you joined, but what made you want that costume for an Imperial rather than joining Rebel Legion? Was it just the Rebel Legion wasn't big enough at the time, or?
Well, one, I fit into it. I'm 6'4". I'm a big guy. I don't fit into Stormtrooper costumes. And I did belong to the Rebel Legion for a while, though I haven't pulled that costume out in a long time. I used to have a Rebel Trooper. I used to have I still do have technically an X-Wing pilot, but I almost exclusively troop with the 501st, which is the Empire, the bad guys doing good. And being an Imperial officer, which was what I did primarily, though I have 8 separate approved costumes. It's a face character. People can see your face. You get to breathe. You get to interact. Generally, when you're with a crowd, you're looking after the guys that are wearing helmets, the stormtroopers, the TIE pilots, the Darth Vaders, the various aliens. And so you're looking after them, and you could probably have a more comfortable time. However, if you do the costume right, if you get the right materials, the right accoutrements and everything, it's really nice. It's really slick, and it's not easy to do because the getting the proper fabrics, the proper badges, belts, riding boots, proper riding English leather riding boots fit for your legs and feet. I mean, the entry price of good ones is around $500. You can get some that can pass for a couple hundred, but real equestrian areas probably spend over $1,000 for proper English riding leather boots. There's Darth Vaders that put in literally over $10,000 into their kits, and sometimes above that. So it becomes a money pit and a passion that, for various costumers, it borders on obsessive, but they have a lot of knowledge about something that's incredibly specialized. They're like the world's greatest expert on an ancient Egyptian artifact, of which there's only 3 that exist. So, so I can understand the passion for why they want to do it like they do.
And did you join before or after Survivor's Quest came out by Timothy Zahn, that kind of made the 501st into something that existed within Star Wars itself?
I joined September of 2007.
So that'd be about 3 years after.
Yeah, I have to understand 2007 was the banner year for the Legion. They had existed, 2007 was their 10th anniversary. But what really changed things was Steven Sansweet became the head of fan relations at Lucasfilm. And I think Lucasfilm had always looked at the Legion going, we really don't know what to do with these guys. And Sansweet, who was a fan himself and came from a journalistic background, he immediately saw the utility of having good relations with the Legion. That's why they extended an invitation to different members to try out to be one of 500 stormtroopers in the Rose Bowl parade that year. So January 1st, 2007, 500 stormtroopers from around the world came together to march in the Rose Bowl parade, which George Lucas was the Grand Marshal. And there's video and photos of George meeting the guys. He got to meet Albin Johnson, the founder of the 501st, and he was just utterly blown away. After that, the prominence was cemented. 2009, during Halloween, a couple guys in the DC area get called for a troop, short notice, get your kids together. People are going to pick you up. What are we going to do? Can't tell you. They end up at the White House handing out candy, at the White House, and they get to meet the President of the United States. You get to see that year an opening bell of Wall Street. Legion was there, Darth Vader ringing in the opening bell at the trading floor. So a lot of things like that. 1 versus 100. Remember those cases and stuff? They would bring in. It used to be the 501st was go-to people if you needed a bunch of stormtroopers on short notice. That's how it kind of helped sanction, like someone like Weird Al Yankovic. He would come to town. Some of his songs are Star Wars related, and he would pull in, not officially, would not be officially 501st, but they would go through and they would ask that, hey, would you like to come and help out at Weird Al's concert? And so that relationship continued up until even recently. Like they made The Mandalorian when the first episodes came out in 2020, or was it 2019? I take that back. 2019. It was December of 2019. The first season of Mandalorian. The last episode, you see more than a platoon, but 45 Imperial stormtroopers in the last 2 episodes. Lucasfilm could have fielded maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, but to get it up to looking like a platoon or a company-sized strength of stormtroopers, they called in local costumers from Southern California. When there was another episode where you saw 2 Imperial gunners on artillery on top of a building, I think they were going to put stormtroopers on them, but they said, "Oh, we know some people that have Imperial gunner helmets." Fans came over, volunteered their kits, and that's what ended up on screen. It's an interesting little circle of resources that continue to go back and forth, but it's been facilitated because of the prominence and, of course, the access of the organization.
So you mentioned Steven Sansweet. Is he still with Lucasfilm?
No, he's retired.
Is there anyone in that position now?
There are, and they're doing a good job, but they're not Steve. Steve when he retired, before he retired, he created a museum called Rancho Obi-Wan, which is in California, and it's considered the most preeminent private collection of Star Wars memorabilia anywhere. And I do believe it might be merging with Gus Lopez's collection in the nearby future. I mean, there's a lot of big time collectors that are, as they say, reaching a certain age, and they want these collections that they've curated and kept to continue to go on and to be seen by fans and to inspire new generations of fans. So that's the last where I heard of where Steve is, but he's no longer with Lucasfilm.
So let's transition a little bit to the Disney era. What did you initially feel in the early 2010s when you found out about the Disney acquisition? How did you feel going into The Force Awakens, and then how has your relationship with Star Wars changed over the 10 years they've been producing stories?
I can only speak for myself.
Yes.
And understand that I'm only speaking for me. When I heard that George had sold, and that word came through, believe it or not, at a celebration. It was at that same Star Wars convention down in Orlando. George was in town, and I believe he signed everything over at the Brown Derby at Disney Hollywood, which is really funny because we were there, in the area. I've eaten there many times. I thought it was a natural fit because George did not have a successor.
Mm-hmm.
Quite simply, he did not have anyone in his organization that was going to take over. So it just made sense. The first thing I thought was, I wonder if Disney knows they've just purchased a cult. First thing I thought, I'm like, I wonder if they know. I'm like, they bought an IP, and there's some truth to that. It's not, at the time, it was not the IP that was worth $4 billion. It was the fandom that followed behind and consumed almost everything relentlessly. The whales, the people that were dropping $500 a month on anything and everything every single month, and have been doing so for years and years and years. And that had been going on since the early 1990s, when the marketing really, really upped up. That was what made everything valuable. Was that. It wasn't that, oh, maybe we can make a hit movie or that. There was a reliable fan base that shelled out quite a bit of money. So I was excited. I said, I don't know if they'll get it right, but I was pretty sure that the mouse would self-correct. It would be a Darth Vader-like situation. Oh, you failed. And then bring in the next one. and then eventually someone would get it right and they would clap, but it would be that kind of trim control. I knew who Bob Iger was. I knew Bob Iger was the guy that David Lynch was asking everyone to write in to correct the terrible mistake of canceling Twin Peaks. I remember that back when I was a teenager. So I was like, oh, that guy. Well, that man knows art. So my expectations were, yeah. And some of the stuff that was made has been incredible. And some of it has been not that. And I think a lot of it is timing. I think a lot of it is understanding. I really enjoyed The Force Awakens. I thought it was fun, and it was billed as a return to fun. They went out of their way to say, we're going to have fun. And that's why I didn't call it, oh, it's just a reboot of A New Hope. I'm like, nah, they're trying to say, hey, we're coming back to fun. Shooting guns on the Falcon and flying around here and sneaking into bases and lots of fighter planes and lightsaber battles. It was a return to fun. They had to make it. That's how they were going to bring people into seats. But then I don't think they had an organized plan.
Well, they've been pretty open about not having a plan.
Well, their plan was, oh, we're going to make a movie every year, and then once we really get rolling, we're going to make 2 or 3 of them in a year, like Marvel.
That's not a plan. That's a production line.
That's exactly right, and I think they really thought that people would buy anything regardless of quality or connection, and that was true for a few years.
About 5.
Yeah, the spell got broken. The spell was broken after 2017. Early 2018 is when everything, when people, you know what? I don't want to spend money on this anymore. And
that was the failure of Solo, which I still think is really a shame, because I think Solo's a significantly better movie.
Solo's a great movie. There's nothing wrong with Solo, but Solo, and this is endemic of all franchise IP. Movies pay the price for the previous iteration,
especially when it was just 5 months before it released, and because they were still advertising The Last Jedi, they had almost no advertising for Solo itself. It was just a concatenation of failure that led to Solo's failure. And then, of course, poor Alden Ehrenreich gets blamed, even though I think he was one of the strongest things about the film. And I'm just...
I have no trouble with his performance. His performance was good. His performance was great. I mean, the film has a troubled production history. They paid twice for just a movie, which is a whole separate issue that ought to be discussed, because that's a lot of money. And
well, the Star Wars budgets have been just, in my opinion, shameful. I understand why they happen this way, but I do not appreciate the way they've put pressure on every other movie to increase their budgets with not a particularly strong increase in quality.
No, all the movies have starting with the last Jedi, everything that they made, both with movies and with television shows, has a buy more Ovaltine tag at the end that leads you to something else. I mean, like they famously teased at the end of Solo, oh, look, there's Darth Maul. Oh, what's that going to be about? You get to the end of Mandalorian season 2. Oh, look, Boba Fett's in charge now. We got to see what that story's about.
Except Mandalorian season 2 also had your Ranger, and you also have your
yes.
It was supposed to launch 4 shows. I think it only launched 2, but
you were supposed to get Ahsoka, Rangers of the New Republic, and another season of Mandalorian.
And Boba Fett.
Yes, that's correct. And they were trying, and I understand that's a good plan. They wanted to create the equivalent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Star Wars. And
But they didn't learn from Batman versus Superman that you can't do it in 3 movies.
well, over here, the role-playing games made by Fantasy Flight Games,
Those are really excellent.
they're excellent. They're excellent, but they understood the core. They had the revolution over here, the politics and the war. They had the mysticism, the Sith and Jedi and the Force in the middle. And then over here, they had the outlaws, they had the frontier, they had the crime syndicates, they had the smuggling. And they could all drift between one another. Now think of that. Ahsoka is all the mysticism. It's the Jedi, it's the Sith. Rangers of the New Republic was going to be the war in the politics. And Mando in Book of Boba Fett was the underworld. Mm-hmm. And this is a really good idea with very, very different worlds, very, very different objectives. And it could all come back together with one big Thanos busting. Well, you know, you could have had a big meet together to take on a big bad, and that big bad could have been someone like Thrawn.
Mm-hmm.
But everything changed when Rangers of the New Republic got killed in the crib. They had all the scripts ready to go, got completely derailed. And you could see some of them repurposed for Mando season 3, rather ham-fistedly, but they're there. And I think they just lost their way. I don't think they understood the core characters. Some of it was timing. Like you literally had 3 shows. You had an animated show, Tales of the Jedi. Oh, excuse me, Tales of the Sith, or Tales of the Empire, where you have witches, and then the next show you watch, Ahsoka, has witches, and then the next show you can watch, The Acolyte, has witches, and you're like, you know, that's just too much of same course. Had it been better spaced, maybe if you slipped a Jedi in there, maybe if you put in a Sith, maybe if you gave us a space battle, maybe the palette would have been different. Like Skeleton Crew is a fantastic show. Had it been released in 2019 or 2020, through the roof, legendary. But
I think even if it had been released before Acolyte, it probably would have done significantly better.
It paid for it paid the price for Acolyte, much like Solo paid the price for The Last Jedi.
Absolutely. So one of the things that made me really want to interview you was you talked on your Twitter about something that you call a fan economy, and the way that Lucasfilm and other IP holders, but Lucasfilm is perhaps notorious for doing it because of its previous successes with things like the 501st. But Lucasfilm rewarding fans for loyalty with access, and how that relationship has poisoned the fandom's relationship with itself and with Lucasfilm. Can you expand a bit on that?
Well, it seems that there is a rotating group, and I don't know how big it is. It could be 100 people, it could be 200 people, and they're influencers, and they if they post frequently, if they say the right things, they get the right invites, they get toys sent to them, they get books sent to them, they get all kinds of things sent to them. And it's not a matter of jealousy. It's just that, are you getting honest impressions from them? And I don't think you do. I mean, some of them, and their praise is not praise because there's no context, there's no soul, there's no depth in what they're saying. They can't elucidate why they like what they like. It's just a profession of faith. And excuse me for saying that, but it feels very much like I'm in a ritual on a pilgrimage to some kind of holy site, and I dare not speak that conditions are not great because I'll get thrown out of the progression. Which is, that's not why I'm here. That's not Star Wars. But this is not particular to Lucasfilm or Star Wars. Hollywood's been doing this in earnest for at least 10 years, and it is a combination of social media. It is a combination of the rise of the influencer, and Hollywood has been trying to control the narrative for years. Most famous one was Ain't It Cool News, and the last of the 1990s Batman movies, the one made by Schumacher. Famously, Harry Knowles went and trashed it. So they got nipples on Batman's suit, and everyone laughed and didn't go see it. And since then, Hollywood is very, very panicky to get ahead and prevent that from happening anymore. And the influencers are the first line of defense. However, it's like being really close to the emperor. There's always someone wanting to do you in. There was a famous meltdown of a influencer on Collider that threw an on-air tantrum. You can search for this on YouTube. Collider Star Wars Galaxy's Edge meltdown. A guy, he got up and started, I work hard for Star Wars. I've been praising it so long. Why did I not get a ticket to go to Galaxy's Edge on opening day? It was spectacular. That was just primo. Just listening. But that's a good example. A few months back, it might have been 6 months back, there was a complete meltdown in Star Wars Twitter. They found someone was catfishing other people. It was just a big blow up, and I just expect that. I mean, are there good people out there that are? Absolutely. There's wonderful influencers, and they're good people, and they do it for the right reasons. And you can tell because of the conversations they have and their love of the subject matter. But then there's others, it's so surface level that a 10-minute conversation tells you everything you need to know. You're not going to get anything more than them holding up a sign saying "Eat at Joe's." But for some reason, those are people who get rewarded. That's the economy, and it has caused the lowest ratings in the history of the studio to this point. They are not as effective as they thought they would be, and they have driven away so many of the fans. I mean, but that's another age-old story. Perfection and nirvana will happen once we drive away the undesirables. Well, the standards are setting. There's not many desirables that fit their mold. It might be a club of about 15 people, and that's not enough to prop up an entire IP.
Do you think that Lucasfilm will course correct? I mean, I think there has been a bit of a course correct once when you had Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni starting out the shows, but then they kind of drove the shows into the ground. You can argue the merits of various specific shows, but certainly the value of a Star Wars show is very low right now, even a high quality one like Skeleton Crew.
Things will get better. I just can't tell you when.
Yeah,
that's it's they're going to try something, and if that doesn't work, they'll try something else. The problem is that they are the same old grape from the same old vine in the same old bottle. How do you find people that know this world and know this galaxy and understand the themes? And also, how can they come in and write and do a story? Now, Tony Gilroy has done it beautifully. Andor is not just a good Star Wars story. It's probably the best thing Lucasfilm's ever put together. And it's a shame because, once again, I think it paid the price of too many people didn't want to give it a chance. And that's why it had the viewership. But it is the one show where viewership has steadily climbed month after month after month, year after year. And I think season 2 might be an event. But I don't hold out a lot of hope as long as the same leadership they've had before stays in charge. It's you know, it's just like a company. It's just like a country. The person who dug your hole is probably not going to be the one to lead you out of the hole.
Personnel is policy. Almost
there's no shame saying, well, maybe that didn't work. Let's try something new. Maybe I'll step back and let's see what happens over here.
Except that I think that the people in charge do think there's shame.
Well, if you believe that Star Wars was an immutable property that couldn't help but to make money, and it was always going to make money, and now it is not, then you're probably going to blame anyone but your product.
So we're at 40 minutes. Do you have a few more? Or do you want to wrap up now?
No, let's keep going.
All right. Well, I wanted to dig into two specific things. One is the Acolyte, and the other is the X-Wing series, which is very close to my heart. But let's touch the Acolyte first so we can end on a higher note.
Sure.
So we've had a bit of a conversation on Twitter about the Acolyte, and I really appreciate it. I actually did not watch the Acolyte because
You're missing.
When I hit 30, I decided that I was not going to deliberately watch things that would make me upset or mad.
Suffering brings us closer to God.
Yes. I spent a lot of my 20s being very angry, and it was not healthy. And so I have not watched The Acolyte, but I have had a lot of interaction with people who have watched it and have been very thoughtful about it. And you're one of those, and I appreciate that because I'm a fan of the Republic Commando series of games and books. I'm not really a gamer, so don't ask me too much about the game, but I really enjoy the books by Karen Traviss. And I really I have very strong philosophical differences with the prequel Jedi. I think there's a lot of good things about them. I particularly appreciate Qui-Gon Jinn, but the leadership, especially Mace Windu and Yoda, and the way the Jedi are portrayed in the films and a lot of the tie-in media, I find to be very cold and
dogmatic. They're dogmatic. That's the Jedi.
Yes, dogmatic, exactly. There's no flexibility. There's no connection with normal humans. They only have relationships with other Jedi, and they're very stunted relationships. So I have a very negative view. And so when people are like, oh, the Acolyte criticizes the Jedi, I was like, well, I think the Jedi needs some criticism. I don't agree with Order 66. Let's be clear. I'm not a fan of Darth. I'm not a fan of the Sith. I'm not a fan of the Darth Sidious killing them all. But I did think they needed a massive reformation, which I think Luke in the New Jedi Order series of books provided that reformation of being more human and less dogmatic. But you said and articulated very well that it wasn't the prequel Jedi that I forget the showrunner, but the maker of the Acolyte was criticizing. She was putting in a bunch of her own personal demons and saying this is the Jedi, even though that's not what the Jedi were before.
Yeah, she was using as a
Leslie Headland. That's who we're.
She was working through things, and
they
were things that were not in the Star Wars universe that she was working through. Don't get me wrong, the Jedi did need a reformation. That is obvious. And if you want to be a really big nerd, if you really want to go back to the Knights of the Old Republic 4,000 years ago and the start of the wars with the Sith and the Jedi, which extend 3,000 years to 1,000 years before, when Darth Bane is the only survivor. Him and his apprentice are the only survivors. All the Sith get wiped out at the end of the wars. They have something called the Ruusan Reformation. People forget there were Jedi chancellors of the Republic. There were Jedi warlords that led large armies. And the Ruusan Reformations happened. Well, what happens? The Jedi have to give up all claim to political leadership. The Jedi have to give up all claim to military leadership. We don't want Sith popping up, which was happening every few years. A Sith was popping up. And so they obviously, Darth Bane didn't come forward and tell them the rule of two. What we have is the Republic says, we're going to screen and find anyone that's force sensitive, and we'll bring them to you, which is how we're going to deal with Sith. Because if we have anyone on our borders that could possibly become a Sith, we're going to capture them before, bring them to you Jedi. You Jedi can train them. Everyone thinks that the Jedi run around or stealing babies in the middle of the night. That didn't come from the Jedi. That came from the Republic and the peoples of the galaxy going, you know what? We want to stop these Sith wars. Short of killing every force-sensitive person in the galaxy in the crib, maybe this is a good compromise. So you have 1,000 years of peace. The Jedi, it's like a family. It's like a kid from a family of alcoholics. So we have all these rules. We must never taste alcohol and never try this and never do this and have no attachments and never get married and never do, and just had all these rules where they could not see the forest or the trees, and that's their rigidity. But the Jedi were not evil. And my problem is, and I watched every episode of The Acolyte. I have every action figure you can buy of The Acolyte. I have almost every book of the High Republic, including every comic book. So I am a good consumer. I buy this stuff. And I watched it, and I had serious issues with it because I don't like seeing the Jedi portrayed as evil. I do not, and they were shown not to be just evil as individuals, but evil as an institution. And I heard people openly praising the Sith. When there are characters in this show where the Sith are murdering innocent bystanders, and that's just going over the heads of people, and they're saying very unironically, the Sith are misunderstood, like they don't realize there's going to be a genocide on Alderaan in 100 years. Just exterminate a whole planet. But I think the Star Wars I know, where good is good and evil is evil, and while there are shades of gray, everything comes clean in the end, has been replaced with, if evil, why sexy? And that's not the moral dynamic that should be allowed. And someone should have stepped in at the conceptual level and said, you know what? We've only shown the Jedi depicted in live action, one other time. One other time have we seen the Jedi Order depicted in live action, and that's the prequels. Maybe the first thing out of the gate, we shouldn't be casting them as abjectly evil as an institution, as individuals. That's shooting yourself in the foot. The first story of live action Jedi should have them portrayed as heroes.
Yeah. I do think it's a real shame that other than, again, I think Luke's New Jedi Order and the expanded universe, the Jedi have generally been plagued with, and this is partly just story constructed, but plagued with poor leadership and bad actors. I mean, Knights of the Old Republic, you have the absolute failure of the Jedi leadership in the Mandalorian Wars, and their very unethical use of Revan in the video game. And then you go all the way through Lord Hoth. And Lord Hoth is a pretty cool character, but he's definitely coming from an extremely flawed system. And then it's just so many flawed leadership decisions that lead to the prequel era, where they're just this stultified and, I believe, overly arrogant order of people who think they are better than the people they're supposed to be serving.
Well, the story we should get, and the story that they should have established, should be like Kung Fu. It should be a Jedi, a master and apprentice, just traveling around, helping people, solving issues. It's a very, very Wild West. It's a very anime concept. I mean, I can name dozens of manga and anime where that is the basic premise. And that's why Star Wars Visions was so successful. Because that was
And I think
mostly
that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are the closest you get to that kind of thing. Partly because Qui-Gon is deliberately cast as a maverick, and I really love that character. Did you read the recent novel, The Living Force by John Jackson Miller?
not yet.
Okay. I highly recommend it because it invigorated some of my appreciation of the prequel era and a lot of my criticisms of the Jedi, in a way that's not as bitter as Travis's was.
I don't know. I don't know how they can win because of the nature of their charge. They're put on such a platform, and they're sanctioned by the Republic. But the Republic is not sanctioning them out of the goodness of their hearts. They're just glad that they're not running everything.
Yeah.
They're it's one of those, let's keep our enemies close to us and keep an eye on them because they have a propensity of going off the rails and taking control of stuff. One of my favorite Jedi stories, and I'm not really into the Jedi. I love the story of a democracy falling to authoritarianism, and then the society throwing off those shackles, trying to figure out what they did wrong and trying to rebuild, which the rebuild has not been very well handled. There's kernels of stuff that tell me that someone had an idea, was really thinking of something good, but then they squander it. But when it comes to Jedi stories, one of my favorites is Tales of the Jedi Redemption. It was that's last story, and that's the redemption of Oleg Kaldroma, who's been closed off to the Force, and he takes Naomi Sunrider's daughter, who seeks him out and offers a chance at his redemption. I thought that was a beautiful story.
It is. It's deeply moving. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of a lot of the Tales of the Jedi, it's very early 90s. That the art is very much of its time, and I think that Veitch and Kevin J. Anderson were still working out the best way to write. But by the time he got to Redemption, Kevin J. Anderson had really figured out how to tell a story, and he poured his heart and soul into it, and it really it's wonderful.
It's emotional. It's emotional, and it comes to the heart of things. And there are stories over the last 40 years. One of the things I really liked hearing about the making of Andor is that someone took the Imperial source book and put it in the hands of Tony Gilroy, and using an old West End Games RPG, that became the backbone for everything. But there are so many amazing stories, particularly from the comic books and the novels, but the comic books in particular. One of my favorites is the story of Jannik Sunbur, the other sons of Tatooine. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, that's the one who became an Imperial officer, right?
Well, yeah, you see his story as a lieutenant in the Imperial Army, and he goes through several battles, and he's assigned to this, I guess, a refinery processing station, and the rebels are doing an operation there, and Luke is undercover as an Imperial officer, and he bumps into this young Imperial officer named Jannik Sunbur, and it turns out Jannik Sunbur's nickname was Tank, the other guy from Tatooine who went to the academy. And they have this long conversation. Like, most of the comic book is just them. Luke is trying not to give away that he's with the rebellion. They're just talking about what's it like to be in the Empire and all the questions that Tank has with what he's done and what's going on. And of course, he doesn't go with him. He finds out and he gets knocked unconscious, and Vader comes there, and he finds out this is the rebel. This is the rebel that blew up the Death Star. But then Tank, this kid from Tatooine who knew Luke's entire family goes to Vader and tells him everything. And like even Tank does not understand what's going on. It's like the thought, like imagine like the Marvel stories dropped the ball. They had like Boba Fett found out, and here's the guy, and this is how Vader found out about Luke. But I loved that Randy Stradley of Dark Horse Comics wrote a story where Vader could find out everything. Everything with Beru and Owen, everything. And it all falls into place. And it kind of explains, at least it kind of softens the impact of why Vader had gone soft with Luke in Empire Strikes Back. You know, because there was like Piet should have been killed at the very, very end of that film, and he wasn't, because something had turned in Vader's head by that point.
Yeah.
That story was written by a guy whose first story in Marvel Comics was back in 1984, and I think it was called The Last Gift of Alderaan. It was a story where Leia is shot down on this planet, and everyone she's with is killed, and one of the TIE fighter pilots survives. So the pilot, who's in a stormtrooper uniform, and Leia have to walk out of the desert together, and it turns out the pilot is from Alderaan. Because they have to cooperate, he's like telling her why he signed up with the Empire. And she's trying to tell him why the Empire is evil. And it's like, I know that might be more academic than some people would want it, because everyone wants a space battle. Everyone wants, big lightsaber swinging. But I just found this incredibly fascinating and satisfying, that type of writing. And maybe it's more important that we talk about today more than ever before. It's kind of timely.
So let's move to my personal favorite part of Star Wars, which is the X-Wing meta series, starting with the video games. And you did a wonderful series of Twitter posts, or maybe it was just a really long Twitter post, about, I think, both X-Wing and TIE Fighter, really digging into why they worked as games, their context in the world in the early 90s, and what games were available and what it was like playing them. But I was wondering if you could expand on how you got into it. Did you play the games as a kid? Well, I guess you were a late teen then, maybe even an adult.
Well, I was just going off to college at the time, and my love of Star Wars caused me to upgrade my computer. I'm taking a quick look here. Yep. So I went from a 25 megahertz 386 processor to a 33 megahertz 486 made by Intel, because in 1992 X-Wing was released, and back in those days you get them on 5 floppy disks, and they would give you a whole book of lore showing you the pictures, the ships, the political situation. There was really no first-person shooters. The first-person shooter that came out was Wolfenstein, and then later Doom. And then after Doom, Dark Forces came out. That was the first real Star Wars shooter. So how can you deliver a true immersive Star Wars experience? The first one was X-Wing, where you start off as an X-Wing pilot. You go through training. If you do all the training, the flight training, and then the historical missions, you are adequately prepared to go out and fight the Empire in what were 3 campaigns. And the campaigns span over a year, leading up to the assault on the Death Star. And they're very, very well thought out. They didn't have a lot of assets for freighters and starships and fighters, but they made it feel like a story. It went from everything from let's go attack and destroy this, to let's defend this, to let's do a surgical insertion, get what we need, protect these ships, and get out. And it was wonderful. And it was interlaced with cut screens, which at the time we thought, oh my goodness, this is just as good as the movie. And it leads to the attack on the Death Star. And then there were 2 more expansions, 2 more campaigns, Imperial Pursuit, and then B-Wing, where you get to fly the B-Wing fighter. And then the following year, in 1993, they released TIE Fighter, where you become an Imperial TIE Fighter pilot and you play everything from the exact opposite perspective. You go through flight school, historical missions, and then you fight in various theaters for different commanders around the galaxy. You start off in a crappy little TIE Fighter, 2 shots and you're dead, 2 hits, which they did not. They were very unapologetic. They didn't give you a buffed out ship. You had to work your way up to that to be worthy of getting a ship that had shields. And it was fantastic. And this one had 2 other expansions that lead right up to, but this one leads right up to just before Return of the Jedi. It actually kicks off at the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And Lawrence Holland and his team, these were the best games ever made. This was followed by X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which didn't have a big storyline, but the graphics were better, which led to X-Wing Alliance, which was, it wasn't just fighters, but you could also fly freighters and get into the gun ports, just like the Millennium Falcon. And then the prequels came out, and no one wanted to do anything from the original trilogy for a number of years. It kind of fell apart. You did see a little bit brought back for Star Wars Galaxies, which was a massive
jump to light speed
game. But the stories, the game was incredible. And yes, with the very, very first X-Wing novel, they go through some of the historical missions that are in the game, and they play it out exactly as you could play it. I remember seeing that. I'm like, wow, actually incorporating tactics and stuff from the game into these stories, which was wonderful.
So, of course, in 1993, Lucasfilm had filled up their 12 novels that they originally had contracted for with Bantam, and they wanted more because they were selling really well. So
Sure.
they hired Mike Stackpole to do video game novelizations, not novelizations, video game tie-in novels to the X-Wing series. And of course, Dark Horse jumped on the bandwagon and did some X-Wing comics. What was your reaction to those, other than you've talked about how the first chapter of X-Wing Rogue Squadron is the redemption mission from the game? But how did you follow those? Did you like them? Did you enjoy the comics as well?
I was really obsessed with the comics. My favorite was the origin story of Wedge Antilles.
Yes, Phantom Affair was fantastic.
With Captain Hask.
And the big space bug on his face.
I mean, because that was just so unusual, and I liked the story of how the Empire was trying to hang together with minor functionaries. Director Izzard was fantastic. Understand this was also the origin of what would become Imperial Intelligence, the ISB. So much lore was coming out of that. I loved the pilots. This was the introduction of Baron Fell, which just a titanic character if there ever was one. There was a story of this child. There was, like a royalty that I guess the child's sister had to kill him. But there was like a scene of where did he go bad, and they show Vader spending time with him, using the Force to have fighters flying around. I liked Dark Horse because they made the bad guys bad, they made evil, and they did it in creative ways. I I'm sorry, I find it trite. You know, the one issue from Marvel a couple years back where all the rebels are surrounding Vader. All I see is dead men. Oh, come on.
Oh man, the Vader fanboys loved that though.
You know, if they want to really, if I don't mind Vader fanboys, but man, you need to get some prime meat and prime steak. You need to read Dark Times where Vader just became Vader. It's only a couple months after Order 66. And he's on a planet that, you know, the clones are conquering. And the clone commander there is just running through numbers like, oh, we had this many captured, this many injured, and they're right on the cliff. And Vader just looks over at the commander and goes, is it true that the clones were programmed with Order 66 from their inception? And the clone commander goes, yeah, yes, Lord Vader. That's one of our pre-programmed commands that we had been, preset with from the earliest days on Kamino. And then Vader just goes back looking over the cliff, and he comes back and goes, do you have an order for me? And the clone commander goes, sir, if such an order existed, you know I would not be able to. And Vader just uses a little bit of the force to knock the guy off the cliff. Because the guy would have had to report it that Vader asked. And there's two other clones that run up, and they go, what happened to the commander? And Vader goes, he must have slipped. And then, like, the comment at the bottom goes, Vader must not slip either. That's Vader. That's the coldness. Yes. You saw in Rogue One. Yes, Vader can kill lots of rebels. It's not hard. It's quite terrifying. But Vader is a bigger threat than just his ability to cut and hack through people. Vader's thinking 5 steps ahead, and Vader's, Vader will survive. Vader's an incredible survivor. I like that. I like that. But X-Wing, people forget that was the first real test case that Star Wars could continue without the big three. You didn't need Han, you didn't need Luke, you didn't need Leia. You could have compelling characters. You could have compelling characters that could carry a story, and it was incredibly viable, and people bought those comic books in good numbers. They bought those novels in good numbers, and they really enjoyed it, and it did spin off into other things. Obviously, the line of Fel emperors, came after that. But I don't know why they don't use some of this stuff as a roadmap.
Jason Fry has actually used some of the X-Wing books and comics as sources for his certain point of view stories, which unfortunately are, they're very short, huge, massive stories, so they're often overlooked. But some of them are being used. I'm curious what you think about Alphabet Squadron and the Squadrons video game, which are kind of the heirs to the X-Wing series in the Disney era.
I have the Alphabet books. I need to reread them. I played Squadrons to the end and absolutely adored the flight mechanics, though I think it was a little reliant on boosting a little too much. And that's not good, but oh well, neither here nor there. I love the game. The story, I love the Imperials. I was incredibly depressed by the Rebels. None of them were fighter pilots. And I'm going to say this may offend people. If you're around real fighter pilots, people that are trained to use aircraft to hunt and kill targets, particularly other human beings that are trying to hunt and kill them, they're supremely confident. They're very extroverted. They are of a particular cut. They are a remarkable group of people. And that didn't have any connection to the characters I saw with the Rebels. I saw a little bit of that with the Imperials. I did not see that with the Rebels. And my issue, and I find that endemic of a lot of Star Wars writing as of late, everyone wants to show people as strong, wise, leaders, stoic. And I don't think they have any personal experience with being around actual wise leaders that get things done and are leaders. They write what they think leaders are. And it's if you've been exposed and you've seen that and you've been around. I've worked with a lot of prior military people, particularly. I used to work in commercial nuclear, and a lot of Navy officers, some from the teams, special forces, and once you've been around those guys and seen that kind of professionalism, when someone doesn't write it right, it's like a beacon and it glares. And that's my problem with Squadrons. Was not very well written, not because the person writing it was a bad writer. It's because they hadn't been exposed to that, and they were filling in character archetypes that they thought would fill in there. Those would not be fighter pilots. They would be killed probably in the first 10 minutes of any engagement if they survive flight training.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. That's actually how I feel a lot about a lot of the rebel characters in the Alphabet Squadron novels. They don't have any joy in their work. They don't have any. They're all just angst muffins who are designed to be reader inserts who want to feel sad about sad things.
There's two dynamics going on there. One, they don't want these people to offend anyone, and there's not an interesting.
They offended me though.
What? I mean, well, there's not an interesting person in the world you'll ever meet that won't offend you. Like for me to have a conversation with anyone, there's going to be a chance of disagreement. And if I disagree with you, I'm running the risk of offending you. That's life. And that makes life great because we synthesize out of that new perspectives. Like, oh, I hadn't considered that before. Maybe I'll look at this. Maybe I'll look at that. And the writing has gone out of its way to not offend anyone in any way, shape, or form. Everyone's cookie cutter. Everyone's come out of the same clone vat. And then the other part is they just don't make anyone interesting. And they're not interesting and they're not offensive.
Because interesting people make mistakes.
What?
Because interesting people make mistakes.
Of course they do.
I actually have this conversation with a lot of younger readers, 15 to 25-year-olds who read the old X-Wing books. And this happens a lot with Corran Horn, who is one of the most interesting characters, but he's deeply flawed. He's very sexually driven. He's not super healthy in the way he makes relationship decisions. And he's very arrogant, which, as you just pointed out, you have to have confidence to take something up and fly close to the speed of light, firing projectile weapons at other people. Like, if you don't have really high confidence, you're not going to get in that cockpit.
I think that a lot of the writers that we have out there writing stuff, and without exception, there's some that are very, very good, and it shows. But a lot of them they just haven't been anywhere. They haven't done anything. They don't have an intellectual curiosity to find out other things and do things. They are extremely rigid in their worldview and how they view everything. And so boring. I don't know how you go through life. Listen to, he's probably not the person to cite, but John Waters, of all people, the director, the Prince of Filth from the 70s and 80s movies that he made. He was talking this way. I mean, he was upset about the conformity. We make I don't know, conformity is so pervasive in everything. And that's part of the reason why everything's boring. The latest, the Ahsoka series. I mean, you had Sabine Wren, a person that is so emotionally tied to Ezra Bridger that she is prepared to betray the entire galaxy to get him back. Betray the galaxy, endanger billions and billions of lives, maybe trillions of lives, by unleashing Thrawn. And she does betray the galaxy, and she does find Ezra Bridger. And when she sees him, she gives him a hug, and then nothing else. I'm like, I was expecting more. I was really expecting more, because Ezra was crazy about her when he first met her. And to see that, you don't have romance anymore. You're not allowed to have romance anymore. Romance might offend people that don't like romance. Oh my God.
Well, they did do a romance that I quite enjoyed in the High Republic recently, which I didn't actually like the book as a whole. Temptations of the Jedi, I think it was. It's either Temptations of the Jedi or Temptations of the Force. But they have a romance that I've been rooting for since the first book of the High Republic. And I think it's actually handled quite well, unlike literally everything else in that book. Have you read that one yet?
No, not yet. I need to. I need to get caught up. This is in the first wave?
No, it's in wave 3.
Wave 3? Okay. I haven't read many of wave 3. I have first and second waves.
What are you most looking forward to coming out, other than Andor, of course, in the next year or two, book-wise?
Oh, book-wise.
Yeah.
Oh, I sincerely hope there will be an emphasis back again on visual guides, but I don't hold my breath. Things have not been the same since Ryder Wyndham left, and even the past books have been scrubbed of offensive material. If you believe that, it's strange. Like the first the Force Awakens guide that came out had a cross section of the Millennium Falcon, and it casually mentioned that a kitchenette was put in to make meals because Leia absolutely thought it was awful, the food that Chewie and Han ate on the Falcon. Which I could believe that. I think that Chewie and Han would have a terrible diet.
They would just eat ration bars.
Yeah, they just eat garbage, takeout, cantinas all the time. That was excised. That was pulled out. Yes, got removed.
Oh my goodness.
Yes,
but that's in the Lego model.
You understand, certain things are allowed, certain things are not allowed. Slave 1 no longer exists.
It's because just Boba Fett starship.
It's called the Fire Spray. The Hutt Slayer.
That's the model. That's like calling it the YT-1300.
The Leia is no longer called the Slave Leia Bikini. It's called the Hutt Slayer. And you have to understand that was one of the hottest selling items, whether it was a figure, whether it was a maquette, a statue. It was huge and it was iconic. And you could go to a convention, whether a comic book convention, the sci-fi convention, the Star Wars convention, and they would have meetups of 50 to 60 women dressed up like Slave Leia. And you could tell there would be some that were doing it for attention, but then there would be others that you knew how they had their hair prepared, how they sat, how they moved. This was an entire homage to Carrie Fisher. And they would not be wearing this outfit otherwise. And I know so many women that gained confidence in themselves and how they dressed and how they went out from that, and now it's absolutely verboten. You will not see it anywhere. And this new orthodoxy, it's there. There's written rules. I mean, I don't have to see the list to know that there is a list. And
it's kind of the air you breathe when you watch a movie or you read one of the books these days.
Well, it's there is a revision that's going on. Like Han Solo did the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. You know, what is Kessel known for? Kessel was known for spice. Han was a spice runner. Han had secret compartments in the Falcon. We lead up to his big moment where he does the Kessel run in 12 parsecs. And what does he smuggle? Fuel. From the planet that is filled with the drug of choice of the galaxy, glitterstim spice, but just happened to have a small little fuel refinery right in the middle of the mine. So let's go grab some coaxium. I mean, because we would not be able to handle that. Oh my God, Han Solo. I mean, Han Solo shot a guy under a table because he was threatening him. Han Solo was not a good guy. That's why his arc is so amazing, because he comes back and risks his life to save Luke and by extension Leia and everyone, the entire rebellion, because he learned to give a damn about someone else. He was a self-centered drug smuggler that did not give a shit about the world. And now, well, we can't have people finding out that. Ooh, can't find out that. I mean, I literally, when you remove slave one because that's offensive, what are they going to do when they find out how Annie grew up on Tatooine? Oh no! What do the Hutts do? Oh no! Can't have that found out. And it'll creep. It just will there. That's why there needs to be. I think there needs to be new leadership.
Yeah, because if your villains are inoffensive, why are they villains? It stops becoming a struggle that's worth believing in and just becomes people waving toys at each other, which I think is too often what these newer stories have been.
Well, I think that one of the problems, and I don't saddle this on Lucasfilm, I saddle it on Disney, is that and this came out, you could see this in 2015. They really tried to market the First Order and the Resistance as lifestyle choices. Pick your aesthetic and just run with it. And there is an amazing commercial advertising for the Halcyon Hotel. They had these two women. They go to the Halcyon Hotel and they chose to side with the First Order. And they turn in Chewbacca. And like, you see them put on, they turn him in, the stormtroopers come, they capture Chewbacca, they take him away to the brig, they put on First Order hats, the flags unfurl, and I'm like, wow, this is tone deaf. I'm like, come live your fascist fantasies at our hotel. You can turn people in. Really? No one here thought this through. And I say that as a person who dresses up as an Imperial officer for charity. But I know I'm a bad guy. I'm not trying to spin it as something else. They've marketed this as lifestyle brands. And when you market as a lifestyle brand, people are going to, well, yeah, but they're not really that bad. No, they are. They are. They wiped out Hosnian Prime. They killed billions. They're monsters. They run. I did not think Han Solo would die in a domestic dispute, but that's how he went out. Died on a domestic dispute on a First Order installation.
Very disappointingly, in my opinion.
What?
I was very disappointed when they killed Chewie in the New Jedi Order. He was saving Han's son, and he got taken out by a moon. Han failed to save anyone and got pushed off of a bridge.
Well, I mean, Leia got to see everyone she ever cared for die, and then she died alone in a cave.
Yep. It's just,
And that people wonder why people are depressed and walked away and don't come back. It's staggering. I mean, the end of the movie, the child of Palpatine, the grandchild of Palpatine, took the family home of the Skywalkers, took the family dog, the family car, the family lightsabers, and the family name. Took everything. Everything.
and I think thematically that could work because in and of course the Last Command, Mara Jade, who is functionally Palpatine's child, not biologically, but she's
Yeah.
molded by him. She turns to the light side. She rejects her path of vengeance, her path of the dark side, and Luke gives her his father's lightsaber in a very Excalibur-esque sense. And I think that works in a way that Rey doesn't, because Rey takes it and never gets real training from Luke. Or, I mean, she gets training from Leia off screen, but I don't think that counts because we don't see it.
There is this entire ideology where the power was within you from the beginning. And I like that Luke gets trained, and the first time out of the gate, he gets his ass handed to him.
Yeah,
because
and Rey's first time out of the gate, she wins, and then she wins again, and then she wins again.
Yeah, what happens after that? Where's the tension? Where's the threat? You already beat him one time.
And I say this as someone who actually likes Rey as a character and likes Daisy Ridley as an actress. I'm not.
Those actors were the most charismatic group of people I've seen assembled since the original trilogy.
And they were squandered by awful writing.
Yeah, I don't blame Daisy Ridley. Daisy Ridley is amazing. I enjoy everything she does. Oscar Isaac was a gift.
Still is. He thankfully found Dune and other great properties.
Sure. I mean, Fenn, the original concept, if you look at a mirror, if we look at this whole concept George Lucas has, what is the original trilogy? You have the prequels here, all the Jedi get wiped out. It's just a couple. And then the Sith get wiped out. These sequel movies should have been the rebuilding of the Jedi Order.
Mm-hmm.
And that should have not just been Rey, it should have also been Finn. And it should have been discovered early on that Finn was Force sensitive also. And it should have led on to that.
And they should have been in love.
There's nothing wrong with that either, because that also breaks the dogma that was established in the prequels.
And also it would have prevented the stupid Kylo Ren romance, which wasn't healthy.
Well, the original concept as laid out by J.J. Abrams was that Rey was going to be the daughter of a clone of Luke Skywalker. Taken from the hand he lost at Bespin. And you see that when she reaches for that lightsaber in Maz Kanata's castle. She is exposed to a vision, and she is in the corridor of the Bespin facility where she sees Vader and Luke fighting. In fact, they filmed the scene where Vader and Luke are fighting with one another, and Luke's hand gets cut off. They even sold those action figures in September of 2015, leading up to the release of the movie. Now, if it had been revealed that she was a child of the clone of Luke, she would have had a better claim to that lightsaber than Kylo Ren did, because Luke got that lightsaber and she would have been descended from Luke. Leia did not get the lightsaber, and Kylo Ren should not have got it if Luke had a direct descendant. So the whole concept and the twisting of I am the child of Vader, I am the child of Vader, I am this really, really weird obsession should be completely undone and undermined by his own rules that someone has a better claim. And yeah, her getting with him was sick. He's a mass murderer, which
Yes.
comes back to my.
And he killed Han Solo.
Well, beyond that, beyond he committed patricide and he murdered an entire village of women and children, you know, it comes back to they were giving in to a small group of people that live by the maxim, if evil, why sexy? And yeah, they're vocal and they're kind of funny. That's not your core audience. It should have been Finn. It should have been Finn. But then again, China would have been upset also. They didn't want to see Finn on the poster. So you got all, I mean, you should not have all this marketing information influencing artistic decisions.
Yeah. Especially when they're decisions that are like, we don't want a Black Jedi romantic lead. That shouldn't be something that is vetoed because of international pressures.
It's the 21st century. And these are, China emerged on the market heavily in the previous 15 years. Will they be there in 10 years at the same level they were back then in 2015? I don't know.
I mean, they already aren't. They've cut back on so many of the films they allow into the country, and Hollywood doesn't count on their money anymore.
Exactly.
So they shouldn't, in my opinion, they should never have.
Well, the end of Rise of Skywalker, you were supposed to see all the Jedi. You were supposed to see them as Force ghosts. But China doesn't like seeing ghosts, so you don't get any Force ghosts.
Disappointing.
So there you got artistic decisions being made because of stuff like that. And you get the results. That's very apparent. And no one's admitted to this, but you don't have to be a genius.
We all know.
Everyone can tell. We're not morons.
We are not.
If truly that was not considered, if that was truly not considered for how that ending was, then the morons are the people that did not think of that, because they ought to have other people writing for them if they didn't think that.
Well, Bob, I really appreciate your insight and your time. Do you have a last thought you want to leave the listeners with?
I believe that things really do work out in the end. I think the best is yet to come. I really, really wish we could have seen Han, Luke, and Leia together one more time. We may see that through the miracle of movie magic with the Grogu and Mandalorian film. Maybe not. But don't give up. There's 40 years worth of material. Share what you love with other people. When someone is loving to death something that you don't care for various reasons, you don't have to poop on it. You don't have to say, oh, that's terrible. You could just turn around and say, oh, that's great, but you ought to try this. Give this a try and help them expand their knowledge. One of the greatest things going on right now is they're republishing all the old classic novels.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars has the greatest farm team ever for stories. If someone just sat around and said, let's animate some of these comic book stories, let's animate some of these novels, they've got material for 20 years.
And the fans are already doing some of this.
Yes, they are. They'll make it on their own. I was going to say that, you know, the Halcyon Hotel's gone, but there's little villages in the high desert of California where people have built entire towns of Mos Eisley buildings. And every couple of weeks they get dressed up in costume and they all hang out there. They have a little economy, they sell things, people stay the night there. And people are doing it. People are going to create what they want. And these are the little gems that are not, you couldn't see this with the influencers. These are the real gems. These are the amazing things. And I hope they grow in prominence. I hope no one slaps a cease and desist on them, because, you know, you can't buy that kind of marketing. and it tells you where things really ought to be heading if there's that much excitement for it. But I had a wonderful time, Ian. Thank you for having me.
Yep.
And I hope this is not the last time we talk.
Well, if it's up to me, definitely won't be. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.